start from the chair's opening statement again, or we can just go straight to the first item. Okay, so you can hear me loud and clear. Okay, so I'm going to turn my microphone off now and hopefully begin again. Thank you, Mario.
Great, thank you. Sorry about the delay there. We got through several years of COVID and it all worked well during COVID. And then as soon as we're not in COVID anymore, it stops working. So thanks very much for your patience. You'll all be very glad to know I don't need stuff from the beginning. So we've got case officers in the meeting today. So we've got Robert Brew leading on item 5, Nick Bouvard on item 6, Catherine Nichol item 7, Thomas Russell item 8, Michael Garvey item 9. I've got other council officers present in the room and virtually. We have Gareth to my right, who is our Government Services Manager, and we've got Legal Officer Sam Woodhead to my left as well. Some of you present in the room would have contacted the Governance Officer in advance of this evening's meeting to register to speak. Objectors to the applications and representatives for the applicant are also present in the room. Before we continue, I just want to briefly outline how this meeting will proceed. We will hear each planning application in turn summarised by the planning officer. We'll then hear a 5-minute statement from the objectors, followed by a 5-minute statement from the applicant. If there is more than one speaker from an applicant or an objector, they'll have to agree amongst themselves beforehand how they will split that 5-minute speaking time. And members of the planning subcommittee will then be free to ask questions of the planning officer, the objectors, or the applicant. It's my role as chair of the planning committee to ensure that members have all the information they need to make a decision, that objectors and applicants have the opportunity to set out their case, and that the meeting runs properly. I'll not be taking any any contributions at all from the floor. This is a meeting in public, it's not a public meeting. You must have given notice to the Governance Officer before the meeting, and the deadline for registering to speak was 4 p.m. yesterday, and the speakers list is now closed. Subcommittee members are not representing either their wards or their political parties. The subcommittee will make its decisions on the basis of site visits they have made, what they have read in the published application report, and of course what we hear this evening. We must make any decision on an application in accordance with the Council Development Plan, including the Council's Local Plan LP33 and the London Plan 2021, unless relevant material planning considerations indicate otherwise. Can I emphasise that subcommittee members should not take into account or discuss non-material planning matters, and when taking a decision, members should not have allowed themselves to prejudge any application prior to this meeting. Similarly, if a member has any interest relating to an application on the meeting agenda, they must consider whether that interest ought to be disclosed, and where appropriate, they must withdraw from the meeting while that application is discussed and voted upon. When we have finished our deliberations on a planning application on the agenda, we'll vote on the recommendation as set out in the published application report. And when the decision is made, that is normally the end of the matter for this subcommittee. The applicant may appeal our decision, and objectors may seek legal redress. I advise you to seek legal advice in either case. And finally, depending on how the meeting this evening progresses, we'll take a short break at around 8 p.m. We'll now move to the published meeting agenda, beginning with item 1, apologies for absence.
We have 3 apologies for absence. Chair, Councillor Potter, Councillor Joseph and Councillor Sadek.
Great, thank you very much, and no apologies for lateness at the moment. Declarations of interest. Can I ask if any of the members have any declarations of interest at this time? Yeah, Councillor Desmond.
Yeah, I'd like to declare a non-pecuniary interest in item 5. My doctor's surgery is next door at number 14 Urban Hive, and I'm also on the Patients Committee. It won't affect my judgment.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? No, I've just got one declaration from myself. So I know at least one member of the people in the room here who are on item number 6, I believe. But yeah, 6, but that's not nothing to do with this tonight in terms of my judgment. So thank you very much. We'll go on to item 3. Any questions or proposals sent to us?
None, Chair.
No. We've got item 4, minutes of the previous meeting, which is pages 11 to 15 in the pack. Do any members of the subcommittee have any comments on the minutes at all? No. Can you indicate that you are happy for them to proceed? Approved? Thank you very much. Great, we move on to the substantive item then. In that case, number 5, we've got Urban Hive on Thaden Road, and will be led by Rob. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It seems to be a night for technical issues. My slideshow isn't working. The first item on the planning item on the agenda is relates to a site at 10 to 13 Urban Hive on Thaden Road. It's within a designated priority industrial area. And hopefully in just a second I'll be able to show you an aerial image of it. We've got gremlins tonight. Cursor, okay. All right.
Yeah, we have all these documents in our pack, don't we? Okay. Here we go, finally. Yeah, as I say, it's within, the site is within Thaden Road Priority Industrial Area. See if I can get the pointer working on here. And this is the building, the site, well, the existing building of the site we're considering tonight. The priority industrial area includes these 3 rows of buildings, plus these buildings which adjoin the River Lee. And those buildings adjoining the River Lee have been the subject of some recent mixed-use redevelopments, residential and commercial, which have a bearing of some sort on the scheme tonight. The site's, as I say, within a PIA, where, as the name suggests, the priority is for industrial uses. Here's a closer view of the site. It's a modern 2-story building. You see it's got quite a large open parking, servicing, and some open storage area in front. And to the rear, you can see the 4 to 5-story residential building of Bellevalia Court. Here's what you've just seen in plan form and the proposed site plan. You can see that the proposed building covers more of the site than the existing, but yeah, the front building line goes up to the back edge of the pavement, but the rear building line is pulled away from the existing rear building line, leaving a bit more space to Bellevalia Court. Here's the proposed ground floor plan. The 3 large units there are purpose designed for light industrial uses. Overall, the scheme would increase the amount of commercial space on the site from 1,300 square meters to 1,900. And we're satisfied that it's the maximum amount of employment space that the site can accommodate in terms of financial viability, that is. And 10% affordable workspace is included. You can see the colonnade on the front of the building, stretching up to the back of the footway. And incidentally, the footway and the carriageway are to be resurfaced as part of the proposals. The scheme is a car-free scheme, but you can just about make out there are 3. Oh, sorry. There are 3. These 3. We can see the words in the blurred. They're actually indicating blue badge spaces, which are all located on the street and quite close to the residential entrances. There are 5 other residence parking bays provided on the street. There are the 2 main residential circulation cores. There's this one here, which has 2 lifts, and that would service 27 flats. And the one on the other side has just 1 lift, and it would serve a fewer flats, 21 flats. At the rear, you can see there's quite a lot of cycle parking provided, a total of 153 spaces. And then at the front, there are 3 refuse and recycling stores, separate ones for commercial and residential. Here's the first floor plan. This is designed as offices, which is beneficial in 2 ways. One, it's more employment space, but secondly, it actually provides a buffer between the industrial uses at ground level and the residential uses above. And here's the second floor plan, which is the first of the residential floors. The scheme will provide a total of 48 homes, including 10 affordable units. This is a provision of 21%, and earlier on I mentioned those mixed-use schemes quite close to the River Lee. This provision of affordable housing is quite comparable to those. Those sites provided varies from 0 to 25%. So it's a sort of level of affordable housing we've been achieving elsewhere in the area. You can see the flats all have private amenity spaces. Those are the sort of yellowy areas. Plus there's a communal amenity space at the rear, which includes some undevised play space as well. One thing to add, because this rear elevation is the one which faces towards Bellevalia Court, we're proposing to attach a condition to require privacy screens along the edge of that amenity space. Moving up to the upper residential floors, these are all fairly similar, so I'll whiz through these fairly quickly. Residential layouts with some deck access at the rear for some of the units. The 3rd, the 4th, the 5th plan. Then up to roof level, more or less the whole of the roof would accommodate a biodiverse green roof. And you can see those 4 large areas of photovoltaic panels. Here's the front elevation. I think it's fair to say that the design was improved through going through the DRP process, that's the design review panel. The fairly prominent colonnade to the street, I think, is an effective contributor to the quality of the scheme. And generally there's a brick facade, and that sort of the sort of regular geometry of the scheme, I think, fits in reasonably well with the area. Here's the rear elevation. You'll see that there are windows at the bottom 2 floors. Those are the commercial floors. This faces onto the car park and rear of Bellevalia Court. There are existing commercial windows in that location, so these aren't introducing a new outlook. Then you see the flank wings, if you like, of the residential has no window openings in it at all, because these ones are fairly close to Bellevalia Court. And then the main residential windows facing towards Bellevalia Court are set back considerably and have that deck access system in between the proposed windows and existing windows at Bellevalia Court. The northern side elevations of the building have the same sort of architectural treatment as the rest. And this isn't the clearest, I'm afraid, but this is a section drawing to help illustrate the impact of the proposed scheme on Bellevalia Court. And I think it's fair to say that the most significant harmful impact of the scheme is a loss of light to the rear windows of Bellevalia Court. In particular, there are two bedrooms with windows at rear ground floor level and 2 at first floor level that would suffer a significant loss of light that, in my opinion, would lead to a significant loss of amenity for the users of those bedrooms. So whilst of course it would be better if there was no harmful impacts at all, there are some mitigating factors to take into account here. Firstly is that the rooms affected are bedrooms, not living rooms, kitchens or dining rooms where a loss of light would be more serious. And there's also the mirror image argument, which you may have heard before it comes across in some of the sunlight and daylight guidance. If I can just highlight, this is the profile of Bellevalia Court. Oops. And this is the profile of the proposed scheme. Those are the rear wings that we're talking about. And this is the setback. So if you imagine a reproduction, a mirror image of Bellevalia Court, it would be closer, not as high, but closer to the existing rear windows. So the net impact of that is that the impact on sunlight and daylight conditions would be roughly similar. There's also this illustration to help explain, excuse me, the relationship between the proposed building and Bellevalia Court. But I think in conclusion, I'd say that the scheme would deliver an uplift in commercial space, including purpose-built light industrial accommodation in a PIA, which is very welcome, and 10% affordable workspace. Would also deliver 48 new homes, including 10 affordable, again, very welcome, all of which is designed to a good standard of accommodation. Architecturally, the design and appearance seems to be enhanced, well, we think would enhance the area, and those benefits outweigh the harm, although significant, the harm to amenity of the occupiers of Bellevalia Court. So it's recommended for approval, subject to conditions and a legal agreement as set out in the report and the addendum. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Rob. We now have, thanks to the lights, we now have, I believe, Danny speaking in objection. Is it just you, Danny? Great. So you've got up to 5 minutes. The lights will turn on. It's 30 seconds at orange, I think.
Great.
And then when it goes red, you're up.
Can you hear
But
me?
as soon as you're ready to start, please do. That's
Can
fine.
you hear me? Yeah. Great.
If you can pull it out towards you a little bit more, that'd be great.
So I'm speaking today on behalf of the residents at Bellevalia Court, of which there are approximately 60 plus residents in 39 apartments. And forgive me because I have a little bit of a list from the residents. I believe they also wrote to the chair and the committee with some complaints as well. But I'll just list through the points that were raised. So firstly, one of the main objections is around parking. We don't believe there's sufficient parking provision for either the office space, the commercial units, or the properties, with 5 bays considered and the amount of properties there, including the office space. The street parking is already overcrowded in the area, and I don't understand why they would expect that the remaining cars would be parking. The other one is on traffic flow. So for the bays that would be out front of the property, it's also a bus route and a route just up to the school up the road where we get a lot of drop-offs in the morning. There's already difficulty with traffic flow around that road, and I believe it will increase that. The property at Bellevuer Court is also subject to a covenant which forbids building over 4 stories. I see that on the map or the plan that you see that some of the properties which face onto Woodmill Road haven't been considered and are higher than 4 stories. There's also a question from some of the residents in the building who face onto the back of the building around the bike store, which is uncovered at the back of the property, and the noise that this would generate with the number of bike stores opening and closing through the night. Alongside the increase in commercial deliveries through the increase in commercial floor space. And then another main objection is around the property being overlooked. You'll see that both the commercial units and the properties look straight out into the rear of our property, looking straight through onto the bedrooms and living areas of many of the residents. That does include some facing balconies, which also face onto the property that is currently on Thaden Road. The window space that you'll see on the industrial unit, which is presently there, has a very narrow building window just at the top of the office space, which are largely unoccupied and don't present any amount of people looking through onto us. As mentioned, there is a light loss of 44% to some of the properties on the ground floor, which is I deem significant. I don't know how you feel about that, but it seems like quite a loss of light to a number of the ground floor properties. Then there were some questions raised by the committee at Bellevuer around the retail deliveries that would be required, increasing the traffic, and how that since there is parking out the front of the current commercial units, how will these be mitigated? Those car parks are often full and there's still often not space to find parking on Thaden Road. If that car park is then built over and then there's an increase in commercial space, how will that be accommodated? And then I believe Graham Simi, who's also contacted the committee, has been in touch with Councillor Ian Rathborne in regard to the doctor's surgery at the Hive, and I see that there is provision for increased funding through the NHS, but we don't believe it's significant enough. There's 2 schools within the area which I believe still have limited places available. I don't have children myself, but from members of the building, I've been told that it's quite hard to access school places. And with 48 new properties, we would like to question how much the provision is covering for child services and for NHS services. Another main grievance from people who had previously objected to this application was around the lack of notice to people who previously posed objection. They were not notified that there was another planning meeting, which is why I'm in attendance speaking on behalf of the building. Only 1 notice was seen on the street and we didn't receive anything through the post as far as I'm aware. So the building was not made aware until last week that this meeting was happening. And so I found it quite hard to take solicitation in time to speak tonight. And further to that, the main objection is the aesthetic of the rear of the building. I don't think anybody has a grievance really around the aesthetic to the road facing. Apart from the fact the covenant on Woodmill prevents you from building straight to the pavement level. There's a provision in the covenant on Woodmill Road that says that you must be, I think it's 4 feet back, which is how the other buildings on the street have been built. They all have a small garden, which sets them back from the street and increases the capacity, reduces the capacity of the building. The elevation on the rear of the building to the people who face backwards doesn't seem to have been considered, and the direct windows looking straight through onto the rear windows of the property are a main concern for a lot of the residents.
5 minutes.
Okay, thank
Great.
you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. We now have supporting Tim Gaskell. Yeah, up to 5 minutes. Again, 30 seconds warning at the amber light. Thank you.
Sorry, I was expecting green. Good evening. My name's Tim Gaskell. I'm here from CMA Planning. We're the applicants, and I'm here with the project team and our client. We believe the proposals represent a good opportunity for this area and will deliver many benefits, including a significant amount of employment floor space, new homes, affordable homes in a well-designed building. I just wanted to start by touching on some of the points raised by the previous speakers. Just running through them as raised. In terms of parking, as officers set out, this is a car-free scheme. The site falls within the CPZ and is within a reasonable walking distance of Clapton Station, so we feel that that is appropriate. We've also offered a travel plan and would offer residents membership of Car Club. In terms of impact on the road with the parking bays, there are existing parking bays on the road. We would be sort of putting new bays in and around those, so there's no change to the width of the road. That would maintain as it is. The site at the moment has a large crossover, so we're simply taking that crossover out through removing the public realm. In terms of noise and deliveries, obviously the site at the moment is in a storage and distribution use. The activities there obviously sort of ebb and flow depending on the tenants, but when it's been busy, some of the number of vehicle movements have been considerable, and obviously they're large vehicles. We feel that the proposal of residential and sort of smaller scale commercial activities would represent an improvement in that sense. We've designed the building very carefully in terms of the daylight. The massing has stepped away, and I think the officers have sort of shown you how the sort of cutaway element works to the rear. We feel that that's is successful in minimising the impacts to the neighbours and ensures that any impacts are very localised and only impact on 1 or 2 bedrooms as opposed to, say, kitchen, living, diners. As you would expect, this scheme will make a significant contribution for CIL, which will impact on infrastructure, delivery, and the contribution in that sense should be over £500,000, which we assume will help to mitigate some of the concerns raised. Jumping back in terms of the scheme more generally, the building at the moment isn't attractive. As a storage and distribution sort of unit, it doesn't employ many people, around 20. The proposal would deliver a significant increase in employment floor space, sort of circa 46%. That would be high quality. We would have sort of light industrial maker type space on the ground floor, office space on the first floor. The number of jobs that would create would be significant. The site is located within an employment area, and we have prioritised that. But we have delivered 21% affordable housing as well. Clearly, the focus being in an employment priority area is for that employment space, but we feel that the affordable housing adds a good balance for the scheme overall. We've worked hard with officers in terms of the design, and it has been considered by the council's design review panel. We feel that works successfully, both in terms of the front and the rear. The existing building detracts from the area. I don't think it adds much. Its service yard is, very visible and not something that we would regard as a positive feature. We feel that the proposal, would make a significant improvement in that sense. Otherwise, I leave it there and hope you can agree with the recommendation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, questions from the committee. Who wants to start us off? Indicate your intentions. Great, Councillor Young, you can kick us off.
I have a few, but happy to be interrupted. First of all, on the light, could we have a bit more on why you're not concerned about that significant reduction of light to those on the ground floor? I think that was what you said, that there is quite a significant reduction, I think 40%, 44%.
Should we take that one first? Should we take light first? I think it's an important one. So how did we come to the conclusion that this is acceptable within this?
Yes. most of the windows, actually, I've just showed this visual image. This shows it better because you can actually see the windows in Bella Bailey Court that are affected. And most of those windows, if not all of them, will experience some sort of reduction in light. Some of those reductions wouldn't be noticeable. I think it's 20% reduction is considered to be noticeable. And a 45% reduction seems a lot, but it may not be so bad. It depends. At the moment, you see some of those windows have a very open aspect because the existing building 2 stories high. There's a lot of light that comes over the top of it. So they're probably getting more daylight than many others. The reduction, 45%, I think, I'll show you the windows which I think are the most harmed. At ground level here, there are 2 bedrooms. Can you see the dot? Just about. And then at first floor level, there's 1 bedroom above that. And then, sorry, 2 bedrooms above that. And then there's a bedroom at ground level right in the corner down there. And a loss of light to 4 bedrooms, harmful loss of light, is regrettable. We wouldn't want to have it. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not such a serious loss that would warrant foregoing the other benefits of the scheme. And to mitigate that loss so that it wasn't harmful at all, you're probably talking about a development which wouldn't be viable. So, but it's a matter of judgment how you balance those various pros and cons.
Thank you. And I've thought, so I'm thinking about sort of combined with light, combined with sort of risks of damp and mold increase in the existing building. Is there a risk that there's an increased risk of damp and mold in the existing building because of light reduction?
Well, I said most of the windows would experience a loss of light, and some of them noticeable, but most of them would still have good levels of light, and it wouldn't affect ventilation at all in any meaningful way. So, I'm no expert on those matters, but I wouldn't have thought it would have made a great difference.
Okay. So turning to the new building rather than the existing building, I see that in 6.5.4 and the paragraphs following that, there's no full embodied carbon assessment at the moment, and you're looking at air source heat pumps have been proposed, I think, but there's a concern about how they'll look on top of the building. Do we have enough information at this stage to know whether we think that the sort of sustainability of the proposed building is good enough? I see that you're proposing it's reserved by condition, but do we have enough information before us to make a decision subject to that? Or would the proposal be that it comes back to this committee to look at the sustainability of the building?
Yeah, there are some gaps in the sustainability information. There's some things which you think could be improved, but it's clear from the information that we have that it meets policy. It provides in excess of the 35% reduction required by policy. We'd like them to go further, and we think there are some issues that further information can be done. There are further information provided on how they're actually going to achieve some of the things, some of the principles, the objectives they said they'll achieve, and we need more information, which is entirely appropriate to put till later. Deciding on materials and stuff is something which is often done. It's difficult for them, if not impossible, to do now. So it's reasonable to require some of these things to be submitted later on. But we are clear that the information does meet policy. But clearly, we'd like them to do more, which is part of the reason for the policies, for the conditions we've proposed.
Yeah, is that something we can ask to come back to us?
Yes, absolutely. Well, would it come back to committee, or is it, no? What is it that you would want to see, I suppose?
There are quite the full wording of the condition is in the addendum, and there's quite a lot of them. Some of it very, very specific and esoteric information that I don't think I would understand.
So, for example, generally the buildings that we see, we're told this building will have air source heat pumps and they will be sitting here and they will look like this and this is what the boxing will look like. In this, we're not being told that. We're being told, actually, we don't really know what they'll look like. We're a bit concerned about how they will look on the roof, and so we want them to go back and reconsider. Well, bearing in mind that the neighbours are quite anxious about how this is going to look and how it's going to impact on them, it would be nice to know what that system is going to look
Yeah.
like and whether it's going to be an eyesore.
No, yeah, this development has been in consideration for a while, and at the time it was originally designed, air source heat pumps weren't a thing really. So they've been reintroduced into the scheme. So it's not the kind of air source heat pump schemes that you've seen before with equipment put on the roof. In this instance, there's a plant room proposed at ground floor level, and what we're proposing is a combination of an air source heat pump that can be fitted there and ventilated, and a highly efficient gas boiler, which is I think 97% efficient or something from memory, and that's part of the specification of that equipment. Is one of the details that we've reserved. In this instance, putting quite large pieces of air source heat pump equipment on the roof we don't think is a good idea, because the building is not that tall, relatively low. The topography means that the roof is quite visible from quite a long way, and we don't really want pieces of kit. I think if air source heat pumps were considered at the time when the scheme was originally sort of gestated, if you like, it would have been integrated more fully into the building. Like we're doing with many schemes now, they're not plonked on top of the roof. They're incorporated within the envelope of the building. This has been done here, but because it's at ground level, there's limits on what you can achieve with air source heat pumps. So that's why we've got to this situation.
So there'll be PV panels on the roof, on the roof, not deck. Where will the air source heat pumps be seen, I suppose, because they need to have an outflow, don't they?
Show you where the plant room is entirely internal. Oops, sorry. You see here in this corner, the LEV substation and a plant room, which has a mezzanine. Sorry, going the wrong way again. Has a mezzanine here at first floor level. So there's a sort of like a two-story plant room at the rear, which to accommodate the gas boilers and air source heat pumps. So the only thing going on the roof is fairly low profile PV panels, plus lit overrun, and there's emergency opening hatches for fire ventilation.
So the roof will be a biodiverse roof and then have the PV panels, but it won't have the air source heat pumps on the roof. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool. Yep.
Residents concerned about the aesthetic of the rear of the building, particularly. Can you talk us through that a bit?
Yeah, this is the rear elevation. The commercial is fairly plain, sort of brickwork with windows, no fancy ornamentation or anything as you'd expect. Then you've got these solid panels with design features incorporated them, so they're not sort of bland flank walls, but there's no window openings in them. There are some balconies in part of them, but they have a solid facade facing Bellevalia Court. Then the rear elevation, this is that deck access system that you can see on the plans, which we thought it only services some of the flats in that central part of the building. The two wings are served more directly from the circulation cores within the wings. So it's not the majority. It's probably about half of the flats accessed from those deck access, but they're nicely designed at deck access. I'll show you on the floor plan. Here you go. For instance, the deck access is set enough far away from the residential windows to allow one neighbour to not look into the close proximity to their neighbour's windows. And there's like the private amenity space, which is the sort of greeny area at the back. We've seen a lot of developments in the borough where deck access actually works really well. Where it hasn't worked is in the older schemes from the 60s and 70s when they're not tended, they're not overlooked, they're not loved. And we think that this deck access would work.
We have Luciana online as well, don't we?
We do, yes.
For
She'd like to
design.
comment.
Luciana, just in terms of that sort of rear elevation, do you have anything to add from a design point of view?
Just to highlight that, obviously there was work done on that re-elevation to improve on the appearance, particularly after the scheme was presented to DRP, because there was feedback from them. And there was the addition of sort of the brick grid, particularly on the upper levels, to add articulation. So we think that it works where it has sort of a very robust kind of brick base, and it's really well articulated with the sort of the recessed sort of brick panels on the sides, and sort of the rhythm of the openings of the windows. And I think the way that they've kind of articulated the deck access to provide some interest to that elevation. So, we feel that it's of sufficient quality and robust enough in terms of the materiality too.
Okay, and the deck access and the sort of bringing it back at the back presumably increases the light, does it? Instead of filling the entire block in?
Yes, well, I suppose Rob can comment more on that aspect, but it does help. I think one thing that it does help too is to kind of break the massing a bit, so that it's not, very, too oppressive and solid. So it definitely improves in that sense too.
So Young, okay, great. I had Councillor Desmond next, if he still wants to go, and then Marshall.
Yes, if I can ask Nick, is it intended to build these traditionally with brick and breeze block, or is it going to be timber frame? There was a very nasty fire several years ago in a building a little way before, and I'm not sure what the building composition was, but it spread like wildfire. So A, composition of the building, and B, can you confirm there won't be any cladding which could exacerbate any fire? Also, I noticed in the report there's no feedback from the fire service. Is there any particular reason from that? We certainly used to have input from various statutory organisations like them. So perhaps I could ask Graham if you've had any contact with them to check that they're happy with the design.
Yeah, we haven't received a response on them, but it's not unusual. They tend to comment on taller buildings at 5 stories, 6 stories. It's not one which is up. I think it would have to be pretty badly designed for them to comment. Just that judging from the experience and the comments we get. Once you get sort of up to sort of 20 meters or more, then which would be sort of 15, 16 stories high, then they tend to take much more interest in that. But I'm only guessing, surmising.
Great, thank you. And then just on the materials used, fire is a sort of more of a building control measure, but if you can talk us through some of the materials you plan to use.
Well, I was just going to reiterate that point. I mean, obviously the main material used is brick, as you can see from the sort of main elevations. But what I'd highlight is that the building regulations and the fire regime is a very fast changing area at the moment, and we will be, following building regulations control, taking specialist fire advice on that. But as Rob highlighted, it's not a tall building in a fire sense, so we don't see that being a problem. It's just a process that one obviously has to follow very carefully.
Thanks so much, Councillor Narcos.
Yeah, thank you. So it was just on the kind of housing tenure mix. So it says that the unit size mix isn't compliant with policy. I was just wondering kind of what discussions were had with the applicant about whether that could be adjusted to make it more policy compliant in terms of the number of 3 beds, 2 beds, 1 beds, and how much of how that kind of relates to the fact there was a sort of disagreement on the financial viability assessment of what was viable in terms of housing.
Yes, I think in terms of the housing mix, it's more the recommendation policies. I think for 33% for 3 bedrooms or more, this delivers I think about 20% from memory. So it's not far off, or is it 18.5? Yeah. So I mean that's not unusual in a scheme. Sort of once you get sort of over 20 units or so, and the schemes get bigger, it tends to have fewer sort of what used to be called family-sized units in them. I don't, yeah, we'd rather have more, but then again, we'd probably get less affordable housing if we did that. And in terms of the viability, I think we've agreed this offer of like 10 affordable housing units to go in there, even though that the developers are insisting that they think that scheme is not viable. We think there are some the differences between us in terms of the viability relate to the inclusion of the financial cost of a restricted covenant that applies to the site that we think should be reflected in the value of the site and the value of the site itself. We think the existing use value that they've included in the viability assessment is a little overinflated. And similarly, on some of the values that are included there for the proposed flats, we think those are a little bit underestimated. But I think if you resolved all those differences, we'd end up in the situation we're in now with this kind of offer. So in a way, sort of agreeing to disagree, but agreeing on the viability assessment, but agreeing on the this final delivery, I think is not a bad thing.
Okay, I've got questions if no one else does. Right, okay, in that case, just on the loading bay and the current sort of building, it obviously has a sort of drive-in sort of bit for the offloading and work of the building, and that's being designed out essentially. So that now the streetscape has to bear any sort of loading for the businesses that will take part in the sort of take space in this building. So why is that acceptable to lose that off-street loading capacity and move it onto the street?
I think it's because of the comparative nature of the sort of service demands for the two uses. The existing building is predominantly storage. You can see some of the yard in front is actually used for open storage. The sort of vehicles using that tend to be much larger and have longer sort of waiting times, so require somewhere off street to be. The proposed ground floor space is sort of purpose designed industrial space, but it's not going to have like the old fashioned industrial uses in it. It's going to have modern, the equivalent of light industrial uses in it, which have far less requirement for servicing demand. We think it's acceptable for that to be done off street. And that's really it, really, I suppose.
Okay, Joe, can you expand on that a little bit? Sorry, I forgot you were online.
Yeah, I think just further to what Rob is saying, that kind of nuanced change of use means that the delivery and servicing impact is going to be considerably less. So the applicant submitted a trip generation assessment, and that's estimating that there'd be around 10 commercial deliveries per day, which is obviously fairly modest. And I think we're certainly satisfied that will be appropriate on street from that loading bay.
Okay, thanks, Joe. And whilst I've got you, can we talk through the parking questions that the residents kind of raised? So obviously it's a car-free development that's being proposed. Can you tell us how that's reflected in policy or not?
Yeah, of course. I think it's completely understandable that car parking will always generate a level of concern amongst residents. That is understandable. The scheme is car free though, and that means that there's no vehicle parking on site, and that's very much supported in Hackney's policies. And so really that's the main mechanism we have to ensure that people won't own cars on site. They won't be able to apply for a parking permit to park in the CPZ. In addition to that, the controlled parking is fairly extensive as well. So some of the parking zones in Hackney only operate for a couple of hours a day, for example. But with this CPZ, I believe it's Monday to Saturday, I think 8:30 till 6:30 off the top of my head. So it really does mean that it's very hard to own and park a private vehicle. And as I say, in terms of things like the commercial trip generation, that's modest. The public transport accessibility level is relatively low at sort of 2 out of 6. But as has been outlined, you know, there's good rail connections about a 10-minute walk away. So we're certainly satisfied that there shouldn't be any undue parking stress. And I think linked into that, and I won't kind of carry on too much, but in terms of policy, that the council is extremely clear that we will continue to do everything we can to make it difficult to own and run a private vehicle in Hackney. You know, around 36% of our residents own private vehicles, so it is a minority, and we really want to continue to reduce that. In the local area to the site, there are school streets and low traffic neighbourhoods, so we've got, you know, a number of sustainable transport schemes that really do restrict vehicle movements. We've got an exhaustive CPZ, and we're making the site car free as well. So I think, you know, weighing that all up, that there shouldn't be any kind of over detriment to vehicle parking stress in the local area.
Okay, thanks very much, Joe. And then just a couple of more things from me, but I'm keeping an eye out from my hands from the committee. There was a question raised about the 4-foot setback on the covenant of other buildings on the street. Is that, are you aware of that? Is that a material consideration in this one?
No and no.
Right, okay. Is it, can I just ask the objector, what was the point there, sorry?
I can I'm double checking with our solicitor, but in our land searches, when we applied for the property, there's a covenant across Wood Mill Road. It was previously a sawmine and a sawmill, sorry. And there is a covenant to state that you can't build above 4 stories, and that the house must be set back. I think it's 4 feet from the street. I haven't been able to obtain a copy in time for the meeting, but I can send it over once I receive it from a solicitor if needed.
Is that specific to a separate building, or for the street that this is on, or?
I'm quoting from memory because we only purchased the property a few months ago. I believe it applies up to the edge of Thaden Road, but I need to check that. So.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. And then we heard about overlooking, or rather in-looking, from the back of from the rear elevation of the new proposed building into Bellavia Court. What is the impact and what's the analysis of that, please?
Yeah, I mean, the distances vary because Bellavia Court's at an angle, but with the setback of the upper floors, the distances are not unusual at all. Maybe if I just, we've got the main rear elevation of Bellavia Court here, and the rear building line here, which probably is up to about 30 meters, maybe more. So I think what was of concern to us in terms of overlooking visual privacy was the use of the amenity area at 2nd floor level. If people were coming up to the edge, that is closer. And I think distance is about about 6 meters, about 24 meters. Hence the request for a condition to require a privacy screen there. But the distances on the upper floor levels are not at all unusual in a borough like Hackney.
Was there any consideration to set the deck back slightly? Was there any consideration of setting the deck back slightly, so the edge of the deck, bringing it back?
That's a balance between increasing the visual prominence, if you like, of the deck in terms of the Bellavia residents, and versus like protecting the visual privacy of the people, the future occupiers. So you don't want people wandering down the deck, being in very close proximity to your windows, but then again, you don't want the deck too far away so that it's too visually prominent from Bellavia Court. The distance that's being proposed, we're sort of comfortable with.
And the use of the deck, does that fall within our purview? So in terms of Is it possible to have a sort of midnight party there, or what's the use of it? Does that fall within us, or is it it can be conditioned, I think, can't it?
Well, if it's used for any incidental residential use, I think that wouldn't be any kind of breach. I mean, I suppose it's possible to have a party anywhere, but it's only a walkway. We don't want to make them too narrow. We want a generous amount of space so you can push a buggy and use a bicycle.
No, the deck, so the communal.
Oh, the
space.
communal deck. Oh, right. We haven't considered any restrictions on. It'd be a bit tricky to word one.
Yeah, sorry to cut across you, Rob, but it's something that comes up from time to time on planning applications. So the general principle is that residential uses aren't nuisance generating per se, in that, the normal use of residential spaces won't cause a particular noise nuisance. Therefore, if someone does, if you have a noisy neighbour or residents who like to party on, I suppose it's a noisy neighbour, isn't it? That can be dealt with by separate legislation outside planning. So it wouldn't be a reason to impose a conditional refuse of planning application, because it can be dealt with by separate legislation.
Thank you. There was something about a doctor's surgery, but I don't think the doctor's surgery is currently in the building.
No, there's a doctor's surgery nearby, I think.
Okay, fine. Just checking the committee. And then consultation notices were raised.
Well, checking on our system, we've done 2 rounds of consultation on the current application following design revisions. And as far as I can tell, everybody who sent in comments has been notified of the committee meeting, and a site notice was put up, which complies with the legal requirements.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, but if you don't see it, you don't see it. Like, I think it's a difficult one. If you believe that the consultation notices were put up, and that I'm afraid there is a bare minimum under law about what you need to do to consult, but
I know definitely for a fact site notices were put up. As for notifications to Bellevalia Court, I'm pretty sure they did, but unless I checked the IT system we use for them to see their addresses, I couldn't say hand on heart that was the case.
we check it
here and now.
We have checked it. So sorry, Bill Nassing.
Sorry, yeah, just to confirm, we have checked that, that the notifications were sent out, Rob.
Okay, I think I'm pretty much done. Yeah, Councillor Young.
Just to follow up on the tenure mix, I can see that there's a sort of a hope that in future it might be possible to secure a higher proportion of shared ownership later on. How would that happen, and how can we as a committee sort of assure ourselves that it will happen if possible?
Well, there's no guarantee it would happen at all. It's based on a review of viability. And unless there's some amazing change in wider economic circumstances, I'm afraid the development's likely to get more expensive and less profitable in the future. But it's just in case the viability review mechanism is there, if there is some wider change in economic circumstances, which means we could achieve more affordable housing without making the scheme unviable.
And it's something that has happened in the past, so it's on a reasonable number of applications in the past, and it has been activated, so the mechanisms are there. Great. Any other questions? Okay, none from me. Great. In that case, if I just bring up papers again, we'll go to a vote.
Chair, the recommendation is in your chair's brief.
Oh, thank you. Well done. Sounds like you do my papers in that case. Yeah, exactly. Great. So the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to conditions and completion of a legal agreement. Can all those in favour raise your hands? Thank you. That's unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone participating. We'll wait because I think we'll have a bit of a move over of speakers, objectors and applicants.
So in terms of speakers, we've got no objectors for item 6, Development House. And in terms of speakers, we've just got Matthew. We got to pronounce that correctly? Okay, thank you, Matthew. So if you want to move over, we can got a choice. You can either go.
Great. Okay, so we're moving on to item 6, which is Development House in Shoreditch, Hoxton and Shoreditch. So we are being led by Nick. We'll just get the lights down if you want to prepare yourself. Great.
Thank you. Application 221680 is an application to demolish the existing office building and build a new 10-storey office building with a retail or restaurant use of ground floor. This is a referable scheme, and negotiations with the applicant have been conducted with the assistance of the GLA and TfL. Draw your attention to the addendum, which covers issues such as the removal of an air quality condition, a more detailed consideration of less than substantial harm to the setting of Wesley's Chapel, an amended paragraph on biodiversity to make reference to existing lower ground floor level planters, 2 conditions in respect of odour from the potential restaurant use, and a clarification of the legal agreement requirement for access to Gideon Street. Looking north, the site is on Leonard Circus in Shoreditch on the corner of Paul Street and Leonard Street. The site is currently occupied by a post-war 7-storey office building named Development House, which is currently vacant. Leonard Circus has recently been remodeled and provides a focal point in the neighbourhood with shared surfaces and street traders. The site has excellent transport links with Old Street Station on the very left of this picture and a PTAL rating of 6B. This is the Shoreditch priority area, priority office area. Looking south, the site lies within a mixed context of residential, retail and commercial properties. Scales vary quite widely, but shoulder heights are predominantly of 3 to 5 stories, climbing upwards as they move towards Old Street roundabout and the City Road. 49 to 51 Paul Street lies directly adjacent to the south and is in an advanced stage of construction to become a 10-storey hotel. Telephone House can be seen here in the foreground across Leonard Street to the north. It's another 7-storey post-war office building, which is the subject of another current application for redevelopment. This map from the design and access statement shows the position of heritage assets in relation to the site. It's not within a conservation area, but borders Hackney's South Shoreditch Conservation Area to the east, and is within the setting of the Bunhill Fields and Finsbury Square Conservation Area in Islington to the west. St Michael and All Angels Church is Grade 1 listed here, and Wesley's Chapel is Grade 1 listed in Islington here. This photograph of World War II bomb damage shows why Development House and Telephone House stand where they do, as anomalies within a more historic context. This slide shows the building. The awkward relationship between the existing building and the remodeled Leonard Circus can be seen here, and also here in this view from Leonard Circus. The view west over Leonard Circus with Development House on the left and Telephone House on the right. And since this photograph was taken, this hotel at 49 to 51 Paul Street has reached its 10-storey height. In the rear, over Clare Street car park, which is a surface level car park that will at some point be built on, but at the moment gives a good view over Kiffin Street to the rear of the site and the construction again of the new hotel at Paul Street. And this photograph was taken later in November over Clare Street car park again, and it shows 49 to 51 Paul Street at its full 10-storey height. Finally, a view from Tabernacle Street. This scheme is very similar to that approved previously under 2017-4694 and 2020-0694. Since the time of the previous approvals, in most respects, the policy context has remained consistent, though a new suite of policy documents are in place. Nevertheless, the committee report details areas where policy has been amended, such as sustainability. The reason for the current application is that the original permission was never implemented and is no longer extant, so the approved scheme could no longer be built. Taking a look at the plans, there are 2 basement levels. The first is for plant. The lower ground floor has around half of the 804 square meters of affordable workspace. This would be provided at 40% of local market rents in perpetuity, in line with policy targets for the Shoreditch priority office area. On this floor, there's also a large cycle parking area. The increased size of the cycle parking store is one of the few changes to the approved scheme. The ground floor plan has the rest of the affordable workspace here and along here, and also the retail or restaurant space here, providing an active frontage onto Leonard Circus. The upper floor plans are all in office use. As is laid out in the committee report, the proposed accommodation is of high quality. The 2nd to 4th floors all have the same floor plate. As the building rises, terraces are introduced, reflecting a reduced massing. And at the 9th floor, the scale is greatly reduced and a larger terrace is introduced. This will provide amenity space for the new office workers. The roof plan shows the PV panel areas and will contain biodiverse roofs and planting sufficient to ensure both biodiversity net gain and a policy-compliant urban greening factor. As is laid out in the committee report, in design terms, the proposal is considered of high quality and an appropriate character. The cutbacks to the Paul Street and also to the Leonard Street elevations reduce the perceived bulk and create a slimmer profile to the taller block when viewed directly from Leonard Circus. The modern warehouse typology, robust vertical proportions, and richness in detail of the proposed glazed brick facade is considered to successfully reference the local area in a contemporary manner and to capture the character of the surrounding streets. In conservation terms, while there is some harm identified from the height of the taller element on the setting of the South Shoreditch Conservation Area, this harm is considered to be less than substantial. This slide shows the proposed view past the Grade 1 listed St Michael and All Angels Church, which has had a recent approval for a 6-storey building on the Leonard Street frontage in the foreground here. Here too, the harm caused to the building setting is considered to be less than substantial. London Borough of Islington have raised concerns about the impact on Wesley's Chapel, but we consider that the views are so limited that any low end of less than substantial impact is outweighed by the benefits of the scheme. With regard to the public benefits, the committee report finds that the proposal's high design quality, its enhancement of a rundown site, and its activation of the Leonard Circus frontage, not to mention the amount of employment floor space, would meet the public benefit test to balance against any less than substantial harm it causes to the setting of heritage assets. Overall, the proposal is considered acceptable in conservation and design terms. The committee report also examines the amenity impacts of the proposal in detail. While there are some significant amenity impacts to daylight, sunlight, and outlook, for example, these are in line with the impacts of the consented scheme. Neighbouring residential properties would be left with levels of daylight, sunlight, and outlook that we assess to be typical of the surrounding inner city environment, and the amenity impacts of the proposal are considered to be acceptable. The proposed energy strategy includes many energy efficiency measures, and there are a number of conditions to ensure the sustainability of the building is carried out effectively. A BREEAM rating of excellent and above 75% is required. The building will utilise air source heat pumps, and renewable technologies in the form of photovoltaic panels will be provided on the roof, which will help to meet electricity demand. The scheme exceeds the minimum 35% reduction from the carbon baseline, in line with the GLA and Hackney energy policies. The shortfall from net zero is 55 tonnes per year, which requires a carbon offset payment of £157,000 to be secured through the proposed legal agreement. In terms of transport impacts, it's also considered acceptable. It would be car-free, save for one blue badge space to be provided nearby, and the long stay cycle spaces are to be provided with a balance between accessible spaces and overall quantum. It will be determined at the next stage, in line with the recommended condition. There are no short stay cycle places proposed on the site itself, and as at the time of the previous approval, a financial contribution has been agreed to provide the required 31 short stay spaces within Leonard Circus. Since Transport for London have identified a high level of usage of the existing cycle hire stands in the immediate vicinity, the applicant has agreed to pay £55,000 to help provide a new dock nearby. And a financial contribution towards highways works of £235,000 has been agreed to enable works to the adjacent pavements and an extension of the stone surfacing of the circus onto Paul Street. A further £350,000 towards public realm improvements will build upon the success of the Leonard Circus remodelling, providing additional funds towards the current scheme to extend the Leonard Circus surfaces down Leonard Street to the west. Additional street furniture will provide office space for workers in line with the requirements of local plan policy LP48. As such, the proposal is considered acceptable in its impact on the local highways network and beneficial to the surrounding public realm. To conclude, the proposed application is considered to be policy compliant. The use is appropriate for the priority of office area with the ground floor providing an active use onto Leonard Circus. The proposal represents a high quality design that would enhance this highly visible and underutilised site. And as is detailed in the committee report, in these and other respects, the scheme is considered acceptable. It's recommended for approval, subject to conditions and a legal agreement.
Great, thank you very much, Nick. Next, we don't have anyone objecting, so we move on to the applicant, Matthew Piggott. You've got up to 5 minutes, 30 seconds left when it goes to Amber, and start whenever you're ready.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak at this evening's meeting. My name is Matthew Piggott. I'm an Associate Director at Avison Young, speaking on behalf of Melvale Holdings as their planning consultant. As Nick has said, the application follows a previous permission on the site which was approved in 2019 but not implemented as a result of the COVID pandemic. At the start of 2022, the team was instructed to undertake a comprehensive review of the previous permission to consider the potential to implement the scheme in advance of it expiring in March. The purpose of the review was to understand the potential sustainability performance of the building with a view to achieving the client's commitment to operate at net zero carbon and achieve the maximum embodied carbon reduction in new developments. The review identified several significant improvements that could be made to the previous permission in terms of sustainability credentials. Accordingly, it was decided to resubmit a new application with the same approach in terms of design, height, massing, and materiality, but with improved sustainability performance. The improvements include additional greening to provide over 600% biodiversity net gain, an improvement in carbon savings going up from 35% of the previous permission to 51%, which we expect to be improved further, and a carbon offset payment to make the development net zero carbon, and then further commitments to ensure that 95% of waste at each stage of the building life cycle is diverted from landfill and either reused or recycled. This is on top of the range of benefits associated with the previous permission, which includes the provision of high quality floor space in a priority office area, including 10% affordable workspace in an exceptionally designed building, which will appropriately address and activate Leonard Circus. We have representatives here from AHMM Architects and Waterman's sustainability team. I'd be happy to take any questions you'd have. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, so we've got 3 members of the architects firm. We've got 1 sustainability person here too on behalf of the applicants. Otherwise, questions? I'll kick off in that case. This is probably a design question, so whomever is more wants to answer it. The frontage onto Leonard Circus is pretty sort of cliff-like. It's sort of not set back at the top. What's the thinking behind that and the acceptability of that? And what will be the impacts on Leonard Circus if in the future other buildings come forward and use this as an example?
In terms of the appearance, it's important to highlight that the building, the proposal currently is virtually sort of, it's very similar to what was approved. And in terms of, we didn't feel that there was a need for that top section to be set back. And in fact, the way that the elevation is sort of defined with sort of like divided with a very clear base, a middle, and a sort of a lot lighter in terms of the materiality sort of top, we think works particularly well. And I think it addresses the form of the circus well. And the site is not in itself within the conservation area, and we don't feel that there is any particular harm in the way that the top is kind of expressed. Not sure if there was any specific.
If I just jumped in there slightly, Luciana, I know that when this first came in the previous time, as she says, this is exactly what was approved previously in design terms, at least in terms of massing. But in terms of this view in particular, the work that was done at prior to the previous approval was to make this more of a point block onto Leonard Circus. So it was cutting away the sides that you can see here that you can't see. The building's obviously a lot wider at the lower levels, rather than stepping it back. And I suppose the decision was made at that point that that was the work that needed to be done rather than setting it back. Do you agree with that, Luciana?
Yes, and you touched on something that is quite important there, because with the kind of the lower sort of kind of wings that you have on sort of either side, if we had another sort of setback here, it would probably create a very kind of chaotic sort of composition, and this sort of more well-defined sort of form addresses the circus better. And I think that I think it's a better decision there to kind of have that definition on this sort of kind of corner, let's say, rather than sort of spreading that massing and making it very sort of kind of horizontal. So we think this works pretty well.
Can you tell me what you mean by addresses the circus?
Where where we have the sort of the kind of the most height sort of fronting the circus rather than away from it. That makes sense. Rather than having a kind of a form that sort of follows on the sort of the side streets, sort of a consistent sort of height, you have a little bit more height on that sort of particular point facing the circus. So which I think makes sense from a townscape point of view, because that's kind of like a break in the sort of urban grid that sort of the circus, and it serves to kind of highlight that particular place.
Go on, Nick.
No, I was just going to say, I don't know if you can see the image that is directly above you, but that's what we mean by addressing the circus. It's the frontage that's most directly facing the four sides.
Yeah, I suppose I'm questioning why that's the case, and the answer is because it is, isn't it?
Say that again?
I'm questioning why it is brought forward.
Why you would want it to address the circus?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think you imagine this building's first come in, and I wasn't the case officer then, and neither was Luciana, but I have heard, imagine a building that didn't have these cutbacks at the side. Where are you going to create the reductions in massing? So it seems like a more slender building and less of a monolithic block. The idea was that you've got the circus there, you've got this point block that looks relatively slender in this view, even though there is massing behind it, but you can't see it from this most important view, and that was the aim of like the cutbacks there.
The building's much more broken up behind those.
When you say broken up, what do you mean?
Well, it's not a sheer face of
no. That's where the setbacks have been created, rather than on the circus.
Yeah. My question is, what would the circus look like if all buildings took that around it?
Well,
we're setting a precedent with this building on this.
I mean, you're going to have to use your imagination there, because I can't tell you any further than you can imagine.
Yeah, can I check what you're?
When we've looked at other buildings of this sort of massing, we tend to ask for sort of setbacks or sort of slightly sort of gradated sort of massing, and this time it's just it's a solid mass from ground floor to floor 8. So why do we think that's acceptable in this space?
I think that can,
And just saying it's acceptable because it's the shear face is not acceptable.
yeah, so I guess what Luciana said before, and then I'll let her come in afterwards, I agree with. So I'm just going to reiterate her point, which is that if you were to also set this back, you've got, she used the word chaotic, you've got a building there that doesn't have the simplicity of form that you have here. They try to create a slender view from this most important angle and then create a lighter top so it has the impression of less weight, even though you haven't used the setback there. Luciana, say what you'd like after that.
Yeah, I was going to actually point out it sort of the way that sort of particularly that sort of elevation sort of fronting the sort of circus has been articulated, and sort of the composition has been done there. I think it works very well, and it gives sort of, it has this sort of a very defined base that gives a sort of a sense of scale in terms of kind of the pedestrian sort of that would be experiencing that building. So it's sort of like, it grounds the building, but also provides a sort of like a more modest sort of sense of scale there. And then you have your kind of middle, there's a sort of like a slightly darker color than your top. And I just think from a townscape, sort of an urban sort of legibility point of view, it kind of makes sense to have that sort of, you know, a little bit more height there on that corner, because it sort of helps sort of kind of identify that break in the sort of, in your sort of grid, if that makes sense. And you know, and just to reiterate what, you know, Nick said and I said before, I think, you know, we have to be careful about sort of how to use the setbacks there. I don't think the setback here would necessarily improve a lot. It would just add another element to the form of the building, which would maybe kind of compromise its composition. And given the sort of the open aspect of the circus, it would still remain, you know, relatively noticeable. So I think a more sort of honest and sort of simpler kind of like form works particularly well in this location. And in terms of sort of like precedent for buildings around, obviously, you know, every decision that we're going to be making is taking account of its context, and some of the sites around the circus are actually within the conservation area. So the way that we're going to be looking, you know, we could be looking at those, takes account of that particular context, what's happening behind too. So it's not, I don't think the fact that this building goes to this height means that every other site around that circus can go to that height, because obviously every decision that we're going to be looking at, we have to take account of the established context and what the cumulative impact would be. So that would be a consideration in itself. Yeah, I hope I'll stop there, and I hope it answers your question.
Okay. Yeah, sort of. I suppose looking at the pre-app 1 and pre-app 2, and then the DRP, the pre-app 2 had it much more broke. It's not the monolith to the top. It's got some sort of design aspects to the top, on the top floor that sort of do provide a bit more of a breakup on it. But that was chosen. That was designed
I can't speak. Those were pre-apps that were done prior to the previous approval, rather than this one. This one has been put in because this is what was put in before, to be blunt with you, and it was found acceptable before. They haven't done additional design work on this one because we consider this to be a high quality design with many of the features that we were looking for in this location, and approved it on that basis. So they haven't gone back and reinvented the wheel. But that pre-app 1 and pre-app 2, I'm giving you reported speech and what was happening there on the basis of what previous design officers told me.
Okay, great, thank you. John, Councillor Narcos.
Yeah, it was just on that kind of design point and the point about its context. It mentions that there's another application on is it Telephone House?
Yeah, you almost saw Telephone House today, so that might well be coming in soon.
Okay, so that hasn't come to us yet.
It will come to you soon.
Right, okay. And yeah, so my other question as well was on bike storage. Obviously, yeah, there's quite a lot of bike storage, but it says it's accessible by a lift. Is that sort of normal practice for bike storage? Because it doesn't, from what I can see, what I think is the lift on the plan, it doesn't appear to be a particularly large lift. If you've got, 200 bike spaces, that's quite a lot of traffic to get in a lift.
Yeah, I mean, it is relatively normal. to deal with that, like especially with a relatively small plot size like this. If you had a larger plot size, you might see, for example, a spiral stair from an atrium, something like that. But this is quite a tight site. You'll have noticed that we're squeezing a lot of things like affordable workspace and things like that in there, 2 stair cores.
An architect? Are you registered speaker or are you observer?
I'm one of the speakers, Mark Williams, who's on the list.
Is that
Yeah.
right?
Just to confirm, there's also a staircase with the bike lift as well, and the lift is sized to not only a bike size but also electrical bikes as well. So yeah, there's both provisions within the scheme.
Can I just follow up then in that case, since you've taken the bait on the bikes? You've got 80% of 2-tier bike storage proposed. Given that more and more people have got sort of electric bikes that you've referenced, people are expected to use 90 of those to lift up their heavy electric bike and put it on the 2nd tier, are they?
Mark, shall I take that one? So yeah, that is a comment that we have received from highways officers, which we have responded to, and effectively we have over-provided in terms of space for the cycle parking and showers and lockers. So we are able to rework that cycle spacing to reduce that number of 2-tier stands, which we have agreed to do by condition.
Great, thank you. 2-tier stands are bad. Other people? Councillor Young?
I've got 3 questions on sustainability. Really great that you've improved the sustainability of the building. Thank you. So I'm not sure if these are questions which are relevant for us, so stop me if they're not. There's carbon offset of 157,000, is that right? What could be done to reduce the carbon offset and actually not be using that carbon?
So as a starting point, we're expecting that to be reduced. Following submission, we've significantly increased the amount of PV provision. So we've now got PVs combined with green roofs across the building. So we expect that 51% carbon savings to be increased. And then in terms of the actual detailed design stage, this comes down to the selection of materials and the U values, which is something, again, that we've agreed to various conditions to monitor that process throughout. So we would expect to exceed that in due course.
It's worth noting that the conditions work both ways. So the applicant is expected to meet a certain standard. If they don't meet it, then the carbon offset goes up. But we're all hoping that it will get less carbon offset.
Good. And can we require post-occupancy evaluations or not?
A lot of these, I mean, there's a lot of conditions to read through in terms of sustainability, but you'll find that that's written into quite a lot of it. Reporting back to the GLA, for example, is part of a lot of those conditions.
Good. So last question was, you mentioned diversion from landfill. I think 98% or 100% diversion from landfill. Can you tell us whether that diversion from landfill is to incineration or is it to recycling or something else?
So in terms of the incineration, I suppose the waste plan, 20% goes to incineration. So again, it'll be reviewed, and because the circular economy is being monitored by the GLA, we will be looking at diverting it to reuse sources first, and then potential for recycle, and then depending on the condition.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Yep, Jess.
Chair, I mean, it's not the building itself, this committee, particularly when you just get this feeling of big buildings and being squished in. We used to ask about streetlights and whether or not they could be incorporated in the building to take away, in effect, street clutter. I know it's not there. I just wondered if this is something that we still raise with applicants to take one thing off the pavement.
Is this Nick or Luciana?
I'm just trying to remember if we had a street, because it's such a tight site, or that we had a condition on it.
And Graham then, just for a minute.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but there may well already be an existing street lighting strategy that's part of the Leonard Circus redevelopment. I don't know if anyone in the call would know about it. I would be putting Joe on the spot. He might know. whether there was anything, there might be kind of like decorative architectural form street lights as part of that square. So that might already be in place. It might be something that we wouldn't necessarily want to adjust. So I don't think we'd want to pile straight in and suggest street lighting on the building for this one.
Yeah, I think Joe wants to come in. Joe, are there streetlights there? Are they decorative that we want to keep, or are they not?
So I don't know specifically, but clearly that Leonard Circus, it's already an area of high quality public realm, and the Leonard Street reworks, will be very, very high quality and funded, significantly in part by this development. So I would very much anticipate that high quality street lighting will have been factored in, and obviously all of our policies are geared towards minimizing and reducing, street clutter wherever we can for obvious reasons.
I suppose the question remains: does the planning department still encourage integration of street lighting into the buildings when the paths are so sort of narrow around there, for example? Is it something that's asked of applicants? Is it in policy? Sorry.
Yeah, I'd probably, sorry to cut across you, I probably should have answered that bit of the question straight away. We've imposed it as a condition a few times, and it was always a kind of feasibility condition. And I don't think there's ever been a scenario where the developers, very, very willing developers sometimes, have managed to come to an agreement with the council on it because of the logistics of it. And just very quickly doing a site visit via Google Maps, looking at the street lighting in Leonard Circus, it's all brand new and it's all been done. It looks like it's been designed very much with the remainder of the public realm in mind. So I think it would make much sense to try and suggest any changes in this case.
Okay, thanks very much. We should tackle Wesley's Chapel, given the comments from the neighbouring borough in particular. So can you just run us through the objection, the analysis, and why you've ended up where we have, just so we're clear on it?
So I've got two additional slides in case this came up. If you look close up at Wesley's Chapel, you can see in this figure 1, this is a close-up view. You don't see anything in view 1. Then you get the tiniest sliver coming through that if you zoom in, which probably wouldn't be that helpful. Just believe me, there was the tiniest sliver here on figure 2. By the time that you get to the view that was being objected to by Islington, you're actually quite a long way away. So this is where the view's taken from, within Bunhill Fields. You can see here, if all of the foliage was stripped away, you'd have this corner here of the proposed development above Wesley's Chapel. That hasn't changed from how it was approved, but they are now objecting to it, so we've assessed it. I thought it was useful to have this map here. So this is where it's from. Then you've got 160 meters to Wesley's Chapel through all of these trees. And then you've got another 200 meters to the development. So it's very much in the background. At that point, we consider this to be really the very low level of less than substantial harm. And just as we've balanced that against the public benefits in terms of the heritage system with the conservation areas or the St. Michael and All Angels Chapel, we've considered that it balances acceptably against those public benefits.
Okay, thanks so much. Everyone content with that? Yeah. Any other questions from the committee? No? That's coming from me. I think the tiles in particular are really good. So on that, great. Shall we go to a vote in that case? Great, fantastic. So the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to conditions and completion of a legal agreement in relation to section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 as amended. All those in favour, raise your hands. Thank you very much. That's everyone again. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening for the application. Great. Thank you.
Now everybody's forward to the 3 items also.
Yeah, there yourself. Yeah, if people, should we just take 5 minutes break? That's fine. If we can start again by just after 20 past, that'd be great, if possible. Are we waiting for anyone? Committee's back, I think. All the officers around. Come on. Right, okay. In that case, if we can come to order, we can crack on. This is the authority I have, you see.
You have a gavel.
I know, shall I say? I'll keep it. Councillor Young, Councillor Webb, can we crack on? Is that all right? Thank you very much. Great, we're moving on to item 7. If officers can come to attention as well, that'd be great. Item 7, 5 Oswald's Mead. We're being led by Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So the proposal at 5 Oswald Mead is to change the use of an existing community flat meeting room, which is use class F2, to a residential unit in use class C3. This is to provide a social rent unit and also includes the installation of cycle storage. This is just the site location plan. It's a ground floor unit located within an existing 3-story residential apartment block at the end of Oswald's Mead. The surrounding uses are also in residential use. And to the north is the Riverlea, and just to the south is an existing car parking area. The site is not located within a conservation area, and it's not within the vicinity of any locally listed buildings. This is just a rare picture of the front elevation, as they've called it. Just outlined in red, you can see it's the ground floor unit. And this is just from the front within the car park. So this is referred to as the rear elevation. This is where the cycle storage would be proposed. Just for some context, it's the adjacent building with the residential units and then the surrounding adjacent residential units. This is the existing drawings. And then just the proposed, with the main difference being, you can see the proposed cycle storage in the rear garden area there. So the proposed unit would be a 1-bed, 2-person flat with a gross internal area of 50 square meters. And it would be social rent. So the only external change is the cycle storage unit. And that's just an example of it there. So to summarize, the development would not give rise to any significant offsite amenity or highway impacts and would be delivering a public benefit in the form of a social housing unit. And all other material planning considerations have been covered within the committee report. So the office's recommendation is to approve the planning application subject to conditions and the completion of a legal agreement. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Catherine. We've got no one objecting. We have, in order to answer some questions, if we have any, we have Sarah Couley as the client representative, we have Graham Allison and, Graham Allison and Eleanor Mazon, who are both planning consultants. We've seen some of these before. Does anyone have any questions? I know what they'll be. Anyone, hands up? Go on.
I don't know this particular estate, but are we doing anything to reduce the risk of damp and mould in the property when we're doing this renovation? So in effect, are we also retrofitting it?
My response to that would be that the existing use prior to the community flat was residential itself. So I guess, to my knowledge, nothing new.
Any answers, or is that from the applicant?
Yeah, I mean, just to say that the flat would be refurbished as part of its conversion back from a community flat. And obviously as part of that, it's got to have adequate heating and ventilation, which obviously mitigate against, the effects of mold. So, yeah.
So is the SAT rating or is it EPCC at the moment? Is that building, that block, and therefore this flat, is it already at an EPCC, a sort of acceptable level of energy efficiency?
Sorry, are you asking if it's got a damp-proof course, did you say?
No, I'm
No, I missed that.
asking if it is at a sort of an acceptable level of energy efficiency at the moment as a building, which would be, is normally called an EPCC, is the acceptable level for renting out.
So That's covered by building regulations probably more than planning.
Yeah, but you normally you'd see a proposal that says we are building this to X standard.
Yeah, but I suppose it's change of use. I don't know whether that's okay. So, Catherine, can you just run us through what you do with
Yeah,
it? basically?
could I just say in response to that, we obviously have commitments to improving the EPC standards of housing stock generally. However, we would not generally do it for one unit. It would be done as part of a scheme. So when we hit this block and do improvements, we'll be looking to raise them all to an EPC standard as agreed, but we wouldn't do it for one individual unit. But we would do it when we actually come to that block to retrofit.
Current community centres, where else will people go? Is anyone using this at the moment? Will they go somewhere else? Is there anyone nearby?
Yeah. In terms of the Kings Park ward, there are quite a lot of community facilities, and in relation to the community flat, we've actually got by Forrester Hall and the Clapton Park TMO offices nearby, which would be within reasonable walking distance. So they would be the obvious alternatives. There's also Kingsmead Community Hall, which is not a council hall. It's owned and run by Sanctuary Housing. And again, that's actually 0.3 miles from the community flat. So I think we're confident there are alternative facilities available that could accommodate any new group.
Great, thank you. And then just the cycle storage, is that a standard cycle storage solution that's used by the council? Because it doesn't look hugely robust. Yes, sorry.
That's the same cycle store we've proposed on previous flats, and it's, of galvanized steel and lockable, so it is secure. I think it's bolted to the ground as well.
It looks quite plasticky in the photo, so if it's galvanized steel, that's better, I suppose. Great. Any other questions? We've seen some of these before, so I think we know where we are. Okay. Let's move to a vote. Recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to conditions in section 106 legal agreement. All those in favour, raise your hands. Great, everyone. Thank you very much. Great, thank you. Let's move on swiftly to the next one. I think the supporting people will remain in place, but we are moving on to 15 Keir Hardy Estate, and we are being led by Thomas Russell. Hi.
Okay, so this application is very similar to what Catherine has just presented. It's for a change of use from a community flat to a residential unit. It's at 15 Keir Hardy Estate. This site is a community flat on the ground floor of a 5-storey block. It's directly to the east of Upper Clapton Road and to the south of Springfield and Springfield Park. And the unit would be socially rented. And yeah, you can see the front elevation here. Kind of forms part of a block that surrounds a central green. And yeah, here are adjacent residential units to the north and to the southeast. So the design, there's minimal internal alterations proposed, but there are a few very minor external changes. One of them is the installation of a cycle storage that would measure 1.34 meters in height and 1.97 meters in width. They're also proposing the removal of a very small window across the front elevation. This won't change the character of the front elevation of the unit. If I just go back a couple of slides so that you can see the front elevation of the block. The flat above has also, so it's this very small window here. The flat above has also removed that window. So there won't be any impact on kind of the character of the front elevation of the block. In regard to alternative sites, it's obviously very small, not very usable for kind of large scale meetings. And there's a number of council-run accessible community facilities within walking distance, including Leabridge Hall, which is just to the east, Wrens Park to the south, and Webb Estate to the north, and all, yeah, are very close to the site. The only other thing to mention is that the standard of accommodation, the gross internal area is 44.5 square meters, which is 5.5 square meters less than the standard of 50 square meters for a one-bedroom, two-person unit on one story. This is considered acceptable based on the fact that it was originally built as a residential flat, and based on the kind of need for socially rented residential units. So on balance, that's considered acceptable. Then the only other thing is waste. They would be utilizing communal waste facilities to the front of the site within that kind of green around the blocks, and that also is also considered acceptable. Yeah, approval is recommended subject to conditions and legal agreement.
Great, thank you very much. We have people to answer questions as ever. Do you have any questions, Councillor Young?
It's the same question, and because everyone looked blank, I'm going to try and ask it differently. So you can look up, I just did it, the energy performance certificate for any residential property. On both this and the last property, the energy performance certificates are below an acceptable level. So I just wanted to know whether, when converting this, are we taking any, I take on point Shara's point about the whole block, are we taking any steps to improve the sustainability of this, the energy efficiency of the flat?
Or would you require it, I suppose?
I'm basically saying I'm worried that these flats are going to be likely to become dampened policy because their energy performance is really poor.
I suppose.
Tom, do you want me to answer that? Yeah. Hi, Councillor. Yeah, just to say that upon conversion, we're expecting the applicants to ensure that the premises are up to current building regs standards. So hopefully that will cover those aspects of concern. Anything more to add, applicants?
I mean, just to reiterate that, they will be upgraded to meet building regulations. As part of that, it's likely to involve replacing the heating system, improving the insulation, replacement of lights, appliances, and energy efficient appliances. So it's something that's part of the refurbishment, basically.
Great, thank you. Is it currently in use, and is there somewhere else for residents to use nearby?
So it hasn't been used for the last 3 years, and the nearest community facility is, I think it was within like 140 meters. So that's to the east, and then the other nearest community facilities, which are run by Hackney and fully accessible, I think they're 400 meters to the south and 300 meters to the north. So based on the fact that they're all within walking distance and would provide improved kind of space for community use, the loss of this very small unusable community flat is considered acceptable.
Okay, great, thank you. Other questions? No. In that case, let's move to a vote. So grant planning permit, the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to conditions section 106 legal agreement. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Thank you very much. That's everyone again. Brilliant, thank you. And then the final one, we have item 9, Defoe House, and similar change of use without wanting to preempt Michael. So we're being led by Michael as the case officer this evening. Thank you.
Right, good evening all. Similar application to my previous two colleagues. This is to change the property into residential with a dedicated cycle store to the front. As you can see in the photo there, this location where the wall is to the side will be the location of the cycle store. The previous year was a community flat as a resident association meeting back in 2020, but it's been vacant since then. The site was previous use of the flat and the layout remains unaltered, so it's therefore capable of a conversion back to residential. In terms of the community, the policy meets LPA, loss of community. There are nearby facilities, Hawksley Court, which is, I think it's 4 meters, and another community facility, it's an 8-minute walk. And then there's Abney Hall, which is near Stamford Hill. In terms of the housing standard, the flat is currently 31 square meters. And although there's a shortfall of 6 meters, although there's a shortfall of 6 meters, which should be 37 square meters, this is acceptable given the previous use as a flat. The layout and ventilation is acceptable. There's no alterations to the design of the building except for the cycle storage, which provides sufficient cycle storage of 3 bikes, and the development is a car-free development subject to legal agreement. To the rear, there is a community garden. Photo. Change the photo. Yes, so there's plenty of amenity space for residents to the rear. And in terms of conclusion, of all the acceptable in land use terms subject to a legal agreement. That's it.
Great, thank you very much. Questions? Sure, about the end.
My question that I asked before is answered in 5.11.
Great, thank you. I suppose just about the size, because this one, they've got sort of slightly ever smaller, haven't they? So this, sorry, Michael, how big did you see this, say this one was? 31 square meters? Yeah. Sorry, could you turn your microphone off? Sorry for that one. Thank you.
Yeah, historically it was used as studio flats, so it remains the same. Although 6 meter shortfall, you can't do any other, you can't increase the size due to the layout and the existing flat. So, yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, but otherwise, but that even though it's a shortfall, that's still sort of accessible as a.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't build them that size now, would we?
Sorry?
We wouldn't build them that size now, but we're bringing this.
No, we wouldn't bring them that size. That's probably an old size, probably based on the Parker Morrison standard years ago. So yeah, I think it'll be 37 for 1 person and 39 for 2 people.
And presumably there are other. Do you know whether there are other studio flats of this size on the floor plates or in the buildings?
No, that information has been provided.
Okay. Actually, does the applicant know that?
I think the floor plate of the building repeats as it goes up.
So there'll be.
So there would be. You'd expect there to be a mirroring flat on the upper floors, which is presumably occupied.
Okay, great, thank you. Questions? Yes, Councillor Levy. Coming in at the last minute there.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. This is it's the 3rd one this evening. I'm losing more and more of our community. TRAs have to go further and further away. So there'll be more and more residents associations chasing fewer and fewer places where they can meet. And I just wondered whether the long-term benefit is actually going to be offset by people like saying, well, the weather's not very good, I'm not going to walk 10 minutes to the next wall, and local democracy is hampered. I just wondered in this particular case whether it doesn't say whether there's an active TRA or not. And I just wondered if there is, were they consulted about the loss and what they said if there is one?
Yep. Applicants, is there an active TRA? Do they use this? I think we heard that no one uses it, maybe, but
I mean, there was a TRA Defoe, but they have not met and they've not constituted for some time. So, you know, we know for 3 years they've not been in existence. I think in looking at this, we're very much cognizant of the need to look at alternative community space. And we do feel on the application there is community space that can be used in reasonable walking distance, and we've set that out. In terms of the wider point about loss of community facilities, I think it's just worth noting that we've probably got around 60-ish active TRAs registered with the council at the moment, and 41 of those do not have sole use of their own space. So they're meeting churches, they meet in school spaces, they meet in some of our existing community halls. So I don't think not having sole use of a small space is necessarily a barrier to engagement.
I was going to make a comment about, I hope and I think I know that the council does continue to encourage TRAs, as we've set up a couple of new ones in our ward recently. So I think these, as we've mentioned before, these are flats that were taken, that were built as social rent houses and then have been converted in times when presumably we had a few spare, but we have far fewer spare these days. So
I was just concerned with this, that in the absence of any purpose-built community facility, that these often stood in, I would say, as a reasonable substitute. I was like losing them is not necessarily the way forward, I think. But of course, you know, it's I understand the rationale behind it, and you know, generally support it. Yeah.
Where's the nearest one? Sorry. And did the TRA use this space before they sort of unconstituted themselves?
Sorry, they did use it intermittently, but not since 2019. And they've not expressed any interest in reconstituting. They've not come to us to work with us. And if they did, we would direct them to the alternative, which is Hawksley Court, is the nearest premise. And that is a facility that is run and managed by another TRA. But we find that they'll often be very happy to share their spaces and accommodate groups for meetings.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No? Great. In that case, let's move to a vote. So the recommendation is to grant a planning permission subject to conditions in section 106 legal agreement. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Thank you very much. That's everyone again. Okay, thank you. Thanks to the officers for running through those and to the applicants there. We have delegated decisions. Have people noted those? Any comments or questions on those? Noted. Great, thank you. No, any other business was notified to me. And then that is the end of business. There are proposed meetings in the papers, but obviously the committee will not be constituted until the council AGM in a couple of weeks' time. So we will, Gareth, I'm sure, will let the new committee know of those in the future. Great. I think in that case, that's everything. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, members, and have a good evening. Thank you.